Family, I hope that you are doing great. And if you're watching this video, it's very likely that you are finding yourself in a similar place to where I have found myself many times in the past, which is feeling like you are just spending too much time working in your agency, either because you don't have enough time in the day or just because your agency is not doing what you built it to do, right? For a lot of us, the whole reason that we go into business for ourselves or start an agency is so that we can get some more of that time freedom, spend more time with our loved ones, be able to travel more, play more video games on the couch, whatever it is that you would much rather be doing with your time than working. You might not have been able to do much of that as of late because so much of your time is going into your agency. All right. This video is going to be a breakdown on the thinking and the approaches and some of the mechanisms that we can use to start to reclaim that time and cut our working time in half minimum. Right. But before we even dive into that, we have to get on a common understanding. All right. I don't know what it is. I'm feeling a little combative today. Right. I'm feeling a little bit something, right? Because I want to start out by kind of challenging this premise that we even want to save time, right? That we want to get more of our time back. Because once you dive kind of under the surface, you realize most of the time, that's not what we want. Most of the time, we're not trying to save our time. And the reason I'll say that is pretty simple, okay? If you are working 40 hours a week in your agency right now, as an example reference point, which some of y'all are laughing at because I'm laughing. Let's say that your 40 hours of input are creating and sustaining an agency that's making $50K a month, right? If we were to cut that time in half, let's say that you were only working 20 hours a week within your agency, but you were able to make that same $50K a month, very few of us would actually just take that and say, you know what, I'm just going to do this, right? I'm just going to take this 20 hours of input and keep this $50,000 worth of output every month, and I'm going to be good there, right? Most of us not only want to get our time back, we also want to be able to grow. So what we would do is, if we found ourselves in this situation, we would actually continue to work that same 40 hours that we were working with the understanding that we would get more bang for our buck, right? So instead of working 40 hours and making $50K a month, we would work 40 hours to make $100K a month, and we would be more satisfied with our time spent, right? So if we have that understanding, and maybe that isn't you, right? If you are looking for more of like a lifestyle business, you might just be looking to cut back on your time at this point and be able to keep some of that extra pocket change, or just be able to make whatever it is that you're making, right? I have a good buddy of mine. He's built a web design agency with exactly this in mind. He wanted to be able to make a business that, for all intents and purposes, like covered his bills plus some, but he wasn't too hyper obsessed about growth, right? So regardless of if you are going to just keep your additional 20 hours or if you would reclaim your 20 hours and grow, right? What we're not looking to do out the gate is just cut back on time, right? Because if that was the only concern that we had, then we would just cut our working time in half and we would make less money, right? But for us to be able to cut our working time in half and make the same amount of money, what we're actually looking to do is create more efficiency with the time that we're actually spending, okay? And that introduces this concept of leverage, or this understanding of leverage, right? All that efficiency is going to be, how do we add leverage into the different areas of our business and our time so that the amount of effort that we're putting in is actually creating more momentum, right? So this is a good kind of like diagram that shows the physical example of what leverage looks like. And all that leverage does is magnify the impact of our effort. So we can put the same amount of effort in, but if we're able to create a larger gap, right? If we're able to create a larger outcome with the same amount of effort, that is going to be as a result of additional leverage, right? So in this case, there's a couple of things that you could do that would introduce leverage as you were trying to pull up this slab that's got this box on it, right? Assuming that the amount of leverage that we're creating is going to be the distance that this box moves, we could move the location of this fulcrum, right? So if we moved this right now at the end point, it has the most amount of leverage. For most of us, this is actually kind of like somewhere right here, right? It's closer to the middle. So we don't have as much leverage because we don't have as much distance to even apply our effort onto. We could also change the position of your hand, right? So the hand is currently at the farthest end. It's got the most leverage, but if this was closer to the middle, then that would add a different amount of leverage, a reduced amount of leverage. And then if we shortened this stick, we would get less leverage. But if we made it longer, we would get more. And so we want to find what areas of our business can we apply leverage to in similar ways, right? What are the mechanisms that we can apply in our business that are going to create additional leverage? And so as we're thinking about that, the way I like to think about leverage is as a formula, right? It's formulaic in that what leverage equals is, number one, how efficient the work that needs to be done is in the first place. So the approach that we're taking to doing our work, how efficient are we in doing it? How efficient is that process, right? The saying, there's many ways to skin a cat. I hate to say it. Some of those ways are more efficient than others, right? And so if we are trying to add leverage with a process of work that isn't efficient or as efficient as it could be, that is going to diminish the amount of leverage that we can even add, right? So we've got how efficient the actual process is that we're employing to complete work. And then we have the impact of software, okay? So if we are able to use software that increases efficiency or that is able to automate some of this process or give us additional vision into certain parts of the process, that's going to have an impact that will add to leverage. And then we multiply that by the factor of the impact that people have. So if we add more people to this process, we're able to add more leverage, which means that you as an individual can reduce your time spent working in the business. So I'm going to walk through an example of this using a short form content agency, just because that's something that I've been able to add a lot of leverage for with one of my clients that's a short form content agency. So some of the processes that need to occur that aren't or could not be the most leveraged in a short form content agency exemplify these different stages, right? So one thing that needs to happen in an agency like that, we have to find the best moments for clips, right? So we have all of our source material. What are the best moments from our source clips, right? An example of a way to do that is for a team member to manually scrub through, right? And look at the clip and see what is spiciest, right? And so for them to do that, let's say that it takes them 5 minutes to find a single clip, they might be able to get 12 clips an hour. But if we just make an adjustment to our workflow, right, the way that we do this, if instead of having them manually scrub through, we have them read through the transcription so they can see what stands out the most, then we can do, find a good clip in maybe 2 minutes, and now that 12 clips an hour goes up to 30 clips an hour, right? So that's one area of adjustment. Next, if we multiply that by the factor introduced by the impact of software. So when we're editing, right, we have to remove filler words and dead space, right? Let's say for our editors with their current software or their current workflow, that might take them 5 minutes per clip, right? So they could actually do that for 12 clips an hour. But with an alternative software, let's say Descript for those that are familiar, if it can be done automatically, that's going to be 2 minutes per clip. So again, we can get 30 clips an hour after we make that workflow adjustment, right? And then the last area of impact, and not last in terms of value, but last in terms of approach, right? I always like to start with the process. Then I like to move to software because it's going to add the most leverage. So like it's in descending order of the amount of leverage that you can introduce for the amount of work. For you to change your workload or your process is going to take substantially less work and produce substantially more leverage than starting out with how do we hire more people to employ and work through this inefficient work process, right? So first is going to be the work efficiency, then the software impact, and then the impact of people, right? So once we have a really efficient process for the work to be done, and we have the software that is going to add the most leverage, now we can just add more people into the mix to take advantage of all of the leverage produced in these two steps and really magnify that. So if we have one person that's doing these things, we might be able to get our 30 clips an hour. If we have 5 people, now we got 150 clips an hour, right? And this is kind of where a lot of people start is, okay, I have all of this work to do. How do I hire? How do I hire? But ideally, we want to start, again, in descending order with working efficiency or the efficiency of the process at the top, software, and then move on to people, okay? So this is an example of kind of how all of these things stack up to each other, right? Because if we're able to make an adjustment here and go from 30 clips an hour in how many moments we're pulling, and now go to 30 clips an hour and how many clips we can actually remove the filler words and dead space for, and then magnify those people, right? Whatever the work is that you're doing, you're going to be able to reduce that dramatically, right? But a lot of this is going to fall into different buckets depending on the business that you are in, right? You might not have a video production agency or short form production agency, right? And that's totally good and fine, right? So with that in mind, there's really three areas of business or of the work that we are going to be doing as founders, as agency owners, especially if and when you're caught up in the day-to-day. And it's important to understand that as of now, right, it's very likely that most of the work that you're doing is maintenance work. And when I say maintenance work, what I mean is it's not the work that is bringing new revenue into the business, so to speak. It is the work that is required for you to maintain your revenue growth, your clientele base, your status quo, as it would be, for wherever it is right now, right? So examples of what this looks like, I kind of break this down into three areas. So you've got communication, right? And that's either going to be internal, so communicating with your team about blah, 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 or communicating externally with your clients, maybe partners. But this, again, for maintenance, is not going to include the work that would go into new growth. So this is not you speaking with potential leads, right? This is not the time that you're speaking with potential new partners, right? This is all that's necessary just for you to maintain what you have. So if you're at that 50K mark, 70% of your time right now, and this is just based on time tracking data working with my clients, is going to be spent doing this maintenance work. So you've got the communication, then you've got specialized work. And specialized work is mostly going to be the work that you have a unique skill set to be able to do, right? So oftentimes it's going to be creative work, whether that's because you got a good eye, whether it's because you have a good awareness of or a good understanding of this editing platform, design principles, whatever it is. This is going to be the work that someone would be specialized in because of the skill set or experience or expertise that they have. And then there's contextual work. Contextual work, I like to think of as all the things that don't necessarily require as much of a degree of specialization or skill set per se, but that you are doing because you have a unique insight into what this looks like in the context of your business. So for a lot of people in agencies, what I've seen, especially going into like breaking above that 50 to like 75K a month mark, is things like processing your payroll, hiring and training people, and doing quality assurance. Oftentimes, these are the things that fall onto an agency owner or founder's lap because they understand the context of the business in a way that they feel someone else might not understand. Especially if it comes to like passing along information. So having to pass along the information or keep track of the information around like how your team is paid or expense tracking for a project or anything like that. Oftentimes that goes into maintenance as well, right? So with these understandings, this was kind of what I built all of the actual action steps and resources of this video and of this approach around how do we start to reclaim our time, right? But these are the three areas that we're going to want to answer that question of how do we add leverage into these areas, right? And leverage, the conversation of leverage or the approach that we're going to take to add leverage is relatively simple, right? So I'm only going to speak on leverage points that I've actually employed because if you all have questions, I want you to be able to come to me and actually ask, like, what does that look like for us? But there's all different types of leverage points that you can add within your business that might be unique to your industry and that you might have, you might be able to recognize off rip, right? So I'm going to stick with this example of a short form content agency just because we can get really clear and detailed with it. So I like to think about this more so from the mental and like the mindset approach than even just the tactical, but we're going to dive into both. The very first way that you're going to be able to add leverage into your business, or at least the potential for leverage, is going to be thinking out of this realm of redundancy, right? And you know what redundancy is. It's like if I say something to you and then I say it to you in a different way, you might tell me that that's redundant. All that redundancy is for our intents and purposes is how do we build out and structure our business in such a way that any information, any kind of process, anything that needs to be known does not live and die with me, right? So that's going to be our processes. That's going to be the right way to do things versus the wrong way to do things, the who, what, when, where, and hows of making decisions in the business. We want all of that to live in a place that we can start to kind of table it off of our responsibilities and start to open up the door, not only for us to start making those hires, but for those hires to be able to do what they need to do independently of our input. Most people in their business are either afraid of hiring a team or they have a team that they wish they hadn't hired, right? Or maybe feel like might have been a mistake. But it's only because they don't have redundancy built into their business. So a few ways that you can add redundancy, right? Process mapping. An example of this would almost kind of be like this kind of flow chart, right? So where it's like, hey, boom, 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 right? These are the things that go into our processes, and it's here very much visual for anybody to recognize, right? What that is going to help is not just going to be the time that you spend communicating with your team, but it's also going to be the gap between you doing some of this contextual work and being able to bring someone else in and doing some of this contextual work. Because as soon as you bring them in, now they have a better understanding of the context, which means that even if you still have to bring them to the finish line, right? Instead of you having to do 100% of this work, you have a process map, they're able to get up to speed 70%, and now you're only doing that final 30%, but in a way that actually compounds, right? So every time you do that 30%, it starts to get smaller as they start to understand the context. And at some point, you can fully offhand that to them. So process mapping is going to be one area that compounds in its return for you. Another way that you can build out redundancy is going to be project management and actually utilizing project management tools. One of the biggest things, people think that I like project management just because it's fun. Biggest reason I like project management is because of how much redundancy it creates in our awareness of where a project is at, right? I'll give you an example. For a lot of people, even if they're just managing their own editor, right, for their short form content or whatever that is, if they want to get an awareness of where their content is at and when they can expect it and blah, 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 they have to go and they have to message their editor, and their editor has to stop doing whatever it is that they're doing so that they can message them back and forth and blah, blah, blah. With project management, especially as you start building up a team of more people and you start to scale, you can create redundancy in that back and forth by just having all of those updates and all of that project current status get tracked within your project management software. So for example, within our short form agency, we give our editors batches of reels that they need to edit. We'll let them know the client, we'll let them know the source material within this, and we can see here, right, based on some color coding, I already know looking at this that we have 3 pieces of content that are already scheduled for this client. We have one that was already posted, and we have one that needs approval. And so before I have to go and ask the editor, I can just come into the project management and see, hey, this is where we're at. I don't even need to talk to them. And any questions that they would be asking me, hey, how do we want the style on this? Do we have any particular instructions outside of that? That can live in there too. So I don't have to ask them, they don't have to ask me, but it also creates the opportunity for me to remove myself from even having to manage that process, because if we already have a system in place where someone can come through and see that, I can now bring in a project manager, I can bring in an assistant, and they can really start to take care of that process for me, right? That's something that I've done for many of my clients and even myself, where my virtual assistant, she'll go in and she will actually manage the placement of all of my, scheduling of all of my content, making sure that any revisions that need to get taken care of are taken care of with my editor so that I don't need to do that, right? Boom, cut my working time in half on that, and it can cut yours too within the context of whatever this looks like for you. Now, that is also going to, like I said, speak to communication for internal. But for external, one of the things that I started doing within the short form content agency that has done wonders in cutting back working time there is implementing client portals, right? Client portals, you've probably heard about them. You've definitely used them. Any website that you sign into that has a login, oftentimes they'll have a client portal for you. Now, what I'm not telling you that you need to do is go out and build out some big tech build out for a client portal, right? Our client portals are literally a document, and we customize the document a little bit so that it is unique to our client. But within this document, this is where we host a lot of the answers to common questions for them, as well as a lot of the resources that they would want to find and that they would typically ask us for. And it would require me or someone else on our team to go through and stop whatever we're doing so we can respond to the client with the same answer that we've given them 5 times before across the last month. Now all of that info is consolidated into one place. So for us, an example of what goes into the client portal would be where they can find their drive link with all of their content, where they can find the link to their content calendar so they can see what's going out when, a timeline that kind of maps out the process of working together and how long those things typically take. And then we've also got a welcome video in there just so that they can get a little bit familiar and they aren't starting from zero, right? We want them to feel really good about continuing to work with us as they start to work with us, okay? So that's kind of what came from this way of thinking around redundancy. So whatever that could look like for you, whether it is any and all of the things that I mentioned, or maybe even some additional items, right? Just thinking out of that place, how can I build redundancy in the business, is going to help you. It's probably going to have the biggest effect on your ability to cut your working time in half, okay, and add in more efficiency. Now, if you do already have a relatively large team, right, one of the other things that you as a business owner need to be able to see vision on is the numbers, right? Reporting infrastructure is going to help you get these numbers and these insights from your team members on a regular cadence so that you have the information and the data that you need to make decisions without needing to go and, again, tug on your team member's shirt and ask them a million questions a million times. One of the biggest things that I like to build reporting infrastructure around is time tracking, just because it helps get a very clear vision on, hey, how long do these things take? And what does our bandwidth truly look like? What are the biggest bottleneck areas for us that tie up the majority of our team's labor? And what are the things that maybe could turn into a bandwidth issue as we continue to grow and scale? So that kind of ties in with project management. I use ClickUp. If you know me, you know that. But one of the things I love about it is it has a really good native time tracking suite. But even if it's just you right now, tracking your time is going to be very helpful for you as you are exploring building on your team. Because if you have an awareness of how long certain things take, you can actually get a realistic sense of if you need someone full-time, if you need someone part-time, and start to go into that conversation with a good awareness of what reasonable compensation is, all of that good stuff, right? So I like to get that both for myself and with my team. I mentioned earlier that most of this maintenance work is 70% of our time as founders, and that I got that data from a lot of the clients that I work with. And again, that's only a matter of time tracking. And so when you can get very clear vision into what you are really spending your time doing, it's going to help you start to recognize those areas of redundancy and how important it is for you to start documenting some of this like contextual work, right? By the way, one last thing I'll say here is you can also do this for specialized work, right? With the same kind of awareness that if you can get someone 70% of the way there, you were just able to cut your working time by 70%, even if it means that you still have to close the gap on that 30%, right? But the difference is it's going to be compounding. So you're not going to need to spend that 30% over and over and over again, because as you are training somebody in a specialized work position, right? Let's say a designer, they're not going to design like you out the gate, but the more time that you spend breaking down with them what your design thesis is and what you're looking for and training with them, you will be able to get them closer to 80, 90, and hopefully with the best hires, 100%, if you're able to really document those processes, all right? The last area of leverage that I like to think about is going to be situational leverage, right? Situational leverage is going to be whenever something happens, right? A particular situation that needs a particular approach, right? What happens after that? A lot of our contextual work and even some of our specialized work, a lot of that time is spent just trying to deal with the decision trees that arise whenever a situation occurs, right? A client's not happy, or something didn't work, right? A process isn't working the way that we would typically expect, right? And so the two biggest areas for situational leverage are going to be, number one, contingency plans. So this is an example. We have a posting SOP for our social media posting team within our short form content agency, but we also have like this troubleshooting guide, right? And it walks through, hey, when this happens, if this, then that. If this happens, do that. If that happens, do this, right? And this is a valuable resource for our team to know. Instead of having to come to us and come to our leadership, they are just able to go through this guide, recognize what issue it is that they're having, and follow the steps and know that they did the right thing, right? Most of the time, whenever people are pulling on your sleeve, it might not even be because you didn't tell them what to do, but it's because in a situation of potential crisis, they want to have absolute clarity that they are doing the right thing. They don't want to make matters worse. And so these kind of contingency plans do wonders in that, making sure that they feel secure. And sometimes, right, they might not do the thing right. But again, it's just going to give you more leverage in now being able to adjust to that situation, but also adjust what this document looks like to make sure that it accurately reflects what should be done. All right. This also goes into, this is another good touch point for reporting infrastructure, right? Part of this contingency plan for us, we actually have an incident report. that our posting team will fill out every time something goes wrong, so that we always have awareness on what is going wrong in our process and what might need to be revamped, what might need to be remapped. So it's just very data driven in that way. And they don't even need to, again, disrupt whatever it is that's going on, so that we have that insight. The last thing I'll say here is categorical actions, right? Now, this is something that I have really been honing in on over the last couple of weeks. And the thought here is that depending on whenever there's something new that you want to start or that needs to be done, there are certain actions that need to be taken. So that's not just a matter of, a new client signs on board. Okay, cool. We have to do all of the onboarding stuff. Oftentimes, a lot of this is going to be ideas, right? It's going to be things that, hey, what if we try doing this, right? Or it might be ad hoc task, right? Maybe a client asks you for something specific that you're interested in fulfilling on, but you haven't documented before, potentially, right? So these categorical actions are really just a matter of like thinking in frameworks. So for me, whenever I have a new idea, I like to drop voice notes for my team. And those voice notes are really going to contain a handful of things. It's either I have an idea for content, I have an idea for a new project, right? Something that's going to be more extensive and require more planning. Maybe I have an idea for a task, right? Or there is a task that needs to be done. And based on those different areas or different possibilities, different things need to happen, right? So all of my projects get mapped out in ClickUp. So if I do drop a project, right, we need to create a folder in ClickUp. But if it's just a task, then that task needs to go into the relevant pre-existing like client folder, right? Mapping out those things. So what does it look like when we have a new task come in? What does it look like when we have a new project come in? Really adds a lot of leverage for you, because now you can kind of switch out the endpoint as far as like, how are we sharing this with the team? You could do that as a forum. You could do that as a voice note. You could do this in all these different ways. And regardless of how you communicate it with your team knows based on whatever is being shared in this expression, right, in this communication, I know what needs to be done. And now it's just a matter of refinement, right? So that's actually something that a different agency that's not a short form content, not the short form content agency I've mentioned that I work with, that's something that we do very well. And something that really brought this to light for me is anytime something drops, it'll be as we're going about our day, we're on Slack, whatever that is. But it'll come from leadership, and everybody on the leadership team knows what to do based on what that input is. And then we have set calls throughout the week that we are able to close the gap on. So if we added a task and that it needs a little bit more context, we're able to add that missing 10% of context on the call that we have next Wednesday, but we're still able to do the majority of the planning and starting to get the ball rolling on that work even before then, right? So these are going to be the biggest areas of leverage that I have already implemented and that you can implement for yourself. But more importantly than even just the individual mechanisms is going to be the way of thinking, right? How are we thinking in a way that opens up the door to add the majority of leverage or the most amount of leverage that we can add into our business so that we can reclaim our time and start to shift the amount of time that we're spending on maintenance work, right? Because if we want to take this approach and we want to, keep our 40 hours, but make more money, it's not going to be because that additional 20 hours that we were able to cut back on is going back into the same things. It's going to be because instead of our maintenance work taking up 70% of our time, we're able to reclaim some of the time that we spent on the maintenance work and reallocate that time into the things that are actually going to lead to our growth, right? So maybe that starts to look more like a 50-50. One last interesting thing I'll add here is that the growth items look exactly the same as the maintenance items. It's just the potential that they have. So they, in and of themselves, have more leverage, right? Communication. If you're communicating with internal partners or trusted advisors, right? Or externally, you're communicating with more leads, whatever, all of that's going to lead to growth. Specialized work, right? This could be speaking on stages. This could be hosting events. These are all the things that only you can do based on your knowledge, expertise, and skill set, right? Contextual work. This is going to be going to networking events, right? This is going to be brokering deals or even working with coaches, consultants, right? Whatever it is that you are going to do to get access to additional insight, additional inputs that are going to help you grow your business. So ideally, we actually diminish this maintenance point. We kind of flip it on its head to where instead of this being 70% of our time, maybe it's 30, right? Maybe it's 20. And now we have more control over our time in that the more time that we're spending going into these growth items is just the more opportunity for growth that we have. And you can really start to control the growth of your business in that way. Okay. So I hope this is helpful. Let me know if there's anything here that I can clarify, that I can help with. Would love to walk through it with you. And if this is something that sounds like a lot, right? If being able to add more leverage into your business just seems like something that you would struggle with, or it's something that you have been struggling with, and you're really excited, really pressed towards getting, committed towards getting more leverage in your business and building the business that you actually want, I do have a consulting offer and a consulting company called Black Ops, where we actually help online creative service agencies start to grow and double the amount of profit that they are able to make while reducing the amount of time that you are spending on the day-to-day as a business owner. And if you're interested in exploring what working with us might look like, there's going to be a link below in the description that'll kind of lead you to a guide on how we walk through this, what our approach looks like, and get you some time to actually book a call with us. So hopefully we're able to speak soon, but regardless, would love to hear what implementing this has looked like for you within the context of your business, and excited to see you in the next one.